Hello, everyone, and happy Wednesday. Happy to be back to do our weekly live show. You'll have to excuse me. I'm less than, perfectly put together because, well, just had a baby. So I am maintaining it to the minimum for now. And I had, a big project to blow dry my hair, but then the baby fell asleep in our room where I blow dry my hair. And I thought, there's no way I'm taking the chance to wake a baby up just to blow dry my hair. So that's that. So I just wanted to come in and say hello and take the opportunity for you to meet baby Lancier number 4, because for now, that is the name that he has. Because as many of you know, we were told that we were going to have a little girl, and we had a beautiful name picked out. It was going to be Michaela, and she was due on January 7th. And I say she was due as though she actually existed, but didn't. But turns out the ultrasound was actually wrong at 20 something weeks, and we actually had a boy. And we only found out actually when he, came out. And so for now we have a few names that we are working with, and we are trying to make our final decision, but we didn't want to rush it and just pick a name because we had to pick a name and then come home and sort of regret it, right? Because normally you find out you're pregnant about a month in, so you have a good 8 months at least to pick your baby's name. And we were left with 10 hours in the hospital before we came home. So I felt like that was just too short notice to make such a big decision. So um, legally, where we live, we can wait 30 days to name a baby. So we filled out all the paperwork, but we left the name space open. And we left the paperwork at the hospital with the nurse, and the nurse said, well, when you pick a name, just give me a call. I'll add it in, and then, I'll send it in. So we decided to take a little bit more time. So I just wanted to pop in today, despite, not being at my most fabulous, so that you guys could get the opportunity to meet our little boy and tell you a little bit about our holidays. Because as you can imagine, Christmas has been quite eventful for us. Um, so I was actually due on January 7th. This is our 4th little baby. So usually I give birth anywhere between 39 weeks and 39 weeks and maybe 4 days. I'm very much clockwork. I always give birth on a Monday. Always give birth on a Monday, strangely enough. And it's always late in the evening or at night, basically. And so we had calculated that, if I continued to operate as a clock, baby 4 would come probably around January 3rd or 5, 6, somewhere around those lines. So we did not expect him to be here already. But I think it was on December 23rd. My husband actually, I felt very weird that day. I felt very, very weird, very anxious. And I'm not an anxious person, like at all, but I felt very anxious. I was irritable. I was very, very tired. I was not patient with my children. I had a lot of Braxton Hicks. So, those not painful contractions, but that make your belly get very tight. And my husband was supposed to work a night shift that night. And I remember taking a quick bath before he would leave for work and thinking to try and get rid of the Braxton Hicks, right? And thinking to myself, this is a terrible idea. He's going to go to work. I'm going to go into labor, and I'm going to have this baby alone at home with 3 kids, right? Because we live a little bit remotely. And so we've had 2 midwifery center births, water births, and then we had one unassisted home birth, but with prenatal care by midwives. And for this baby, we didn't have access to midwifery care. We didn't have access to home birth. We didn't have access to anything at all. And I didn't feel comfortable doing an unassisted this time. And so we decided to actually go and have our first hospital birth in the tiny little hospital that we have here, thinking, I've had 3 natural births. I'm a birth advocate. I'm very trained. I help women labor all the time. It should be fairly safe for me to give birth in a hospital, even though I wasn't, particularly excited about it. But on December 23rd, as luck would have it, my husband left to go to work for his night shift. And from the minute he left the driveway, I started having contractions. And by the time he got to work, so maybe like 20 minutes in, I had 5 solid contractions. Now, this is my 4th. I birth pretty fast usually. So I called him and I said, I'm sorry, buddy, but you're going to have to come back home, because once he's in his shift, it can take up to 45 minutes for him to be able to leave and actually get home. And then a 35-minute ride for us to actually get to the hospital. The whole thing was going to take too long. And so he turned around and he came home. And of course, what happens then? My contractions sort of fizzled out. And so what was happening was I was having prodromal labor. Now, if you don't know what prodromal labor is different. They are actually painful contractions. You can actually feel them pull on your cervix. They will actually help you thin out your cervix. They won't necessarily get you very dilated, but they could get you a little bit dilated. And they tend to happen around the same time every day for a few days. And if you're a first-time mom, it can even be a few weeks of prodromal labor. And so I had prodromal labor on the 24th. I had prodromal labor on the 25th. I had prodromal labor again, right? And then on the 26th, which was my husband's last day off before going back to work for the holidays, I started having prodromal labor again. Now, I was getting a little bit annoyed because usually when I have had prodromal labor, within 3 days, I would go into labor, or it would stop and I would have some time, before going in. So at this point I was thinking, look, if you're going to be a Christmas baby, be a Christmas baby, but let's, get on with it, because I have clients on the 29th and the 30th. And so if you want to be born, it's now, or you got to wait until the following week, and you're going to have to be a New Year's Eve baby. And I remember I was sitting on the couch and it was about 7 in the evening, and my prodromal labor kicked in again. Nothing big, nothing dramatic, a little bit closer perhaps than they had been before, but nothing big. And I was sitting and I was watching TV, and all of a sudden I felt like a ninja kick inside of me. Like the baby he didn't turn or change positions, because it wasn't a huge movement in my belly, but it was just kind of like like a very swift, rapid movement. Like he had just ninja kicked me in the hoo-ha. And it was so fast that I actually heard the amniotic fluid swish. And it happened twice during 2 contractions back to back. And I remember telling my husband, if he keeps on, giving me those ninja kicks, he's going to break my water. Now, here's the thing. My waters have never broken, except for like 5 minutes before actually having my baby. So with my 2 first, my waters actually never broke. And I gave birth in call, which means basically you give birth to your baby still in the sack. And then my 3rd, my waters broke for the first time. And I think it was about 5 minutes before he was born. So I've never experienced, your water breaking while in labor. And so I'm sitting on the couch, and my husband gets up and goes to bring our other 2 kids to bed, because it was 7:30, and I looked at him our other 3 kids, sorry. It was 7:30 and I looked at him. I said, "Go put the kids to bed." Like I'm not feeling super. Go put the kids to bed. And sure enough, the moment that he leaves the room, I feel a gush of water start spilling out of me. And I squeezed up and I thought to myself, crap, I am alone in the living room on my couch. And if I squeeze really, really tight, I can hold the water in because I knew that that was not urine. Okay. I can hold the water in and my husband can come back and get me a towel so that I can make it to the bathroom. Foolish of me because I have never lost my waters before. You cannot just squeeze and hold it in. So within, 2 seconds later, huge gush of water all over my couch. Don't worry, guys. My couch was already, if you've seen it in pictures, it's god awful. It's disgusting. It has, every body liquid you can possibly imagine. And we had planned on throwing it out and buying a new one when we move very shortly, but we hadn't done it yet because we were potty training toddlers. And so I thought, let's get the potty training out of the way before we get a nicer couch, right? So now it's going in the trash because, it got a huge gush of amniotic fluid. And so I grabbed a pair of leggings I had removed earlier, tried to use that as a towel and walk my way to the nearest bathroom, leaving a trail of puddles, all the way to the bathroom. And my husband came up and I tried to warn him that I had lost my water. So obviously he put 2 feet in a puddle of amniotic fluid for him. And he started washing, all of the floors. And then I tried to get up to go to our personal bathroom so that I could take a shower, and made more puddles that he basically had to follow me around the house with a towel and then a mop. So that was my first experience with that. We called my dad to come over and watch the kids while they were sleeping. I was having contractions every 3 minutes at this point. So I went in the shower to try and wash myself from having, just leaked all over myself, and hopefully for the rest, or, a big gush of amniotic fluid to just go so that I could put on a pair of pants and hopefully somewhat make it dry to the hospital. And then we went and we left for the hospital. Foolish me, I didn't realize that even though I had lost a huge amount of water, I was going to keep on losing more water every single time I had a contraction, which FYI, if we ever have a baby again, I would like to go back to laboring with my waters not broken. It is way less messy, much more pleasant to labor without your waters broken than to labor with your waters just spilling out everywhere, because you have to put towels and PKs and whatnot everywhere. Carol says, my husband's name is Ian Nicolas. His birthday's tomorrow. I think he looks like Isaiah. So we have not actually named him yet, but for not everyone knows, but our 3 children are named Mael, Mila, and Miko. And the first 2 M starting names were completely accidental. We didn't plan it that way. And then somebody made the remark like, oh, you have 2 M's. So when we were trying to choose our 3rd child's name, we said, well, it can't be an M because we don't know how many children we will have. And if we end up with like 3 M's and then a K, that would be, sort of weird, unfair to that 4th child. And so we tried and tried and tried to find a name that didn't start with an M. And we couldn't agree on a single name until one night I said, Miko? And my husband said, yeah, I love that name. And I said, look, it's an M name. If we end up with 3 kids with M names and we have more, we have to stick to the M after. Like, we're going to have to be super cheesy Duggar style and just have, the same first letter for all of our kids' names because, so now we're stuck with M's, which means this little guy is going to also have a short name that starts with an M, like his brothers and sisters. And that's another thing. On our ultrasound, like I said, he was supposed to be, a little girl, and then turned out to be a little boy, which we only found out, at his delivery. Now, this was our first hospital birth, and if you've read my post about it on my personal page, you'll know that this was my first and last hospital birth. It was, the thing is, what I experienced is nothing. The bad experience that I had in my hospital birth is nothing compared to the stories that women have confided in me, compared to some of the births that I have seen in hospital settings. What I experience is like, we got through it okay. Like, we saved ourselves from a lot of possible trauma. And despite that, it's going to take me a really long time to swallow and digest what was done to us in that hospital. So knowing that we sort of made it out okay, and it was that painful to me, I can only imagine how incredibly painful it must feel for so many moms out there who suffer so much more trauma than what I had to go through in that hospital. And it's the first and last time that I birth in a hospital, unless, I have like a very intense medical reason as to why I need to birth in a hospital. And when and if that day comes, I will choose the hospital and I will choose the physician. I will not be at the mercy of whomever, whichever, is in the hospital that day ever again. Because even as an experienced birthing mother myself, as a birth advocate, as someone who prepares women for birth all the time, I was able to have an unassisted, drug-free, natural vaginal birth in the hospital, but it was a terrible experience. It was a really terrible experience, beginning to end, and it should not be that way. And we were treated very poorly by the physician that was there, very rudely, aggressively. Like, it was just, and this was a him problem. Like, he was just a bad doctor. Like, let's be honest, like, just a terrible, terrible doctor. We literally ended up with, there's 4 physicians that do births at that hospital. And it so happened that on the night that I went into labor, the worst one was on staff. So we literally had the worst possible case, because I know of at least 2 physicians in the hospital who are very, natural prone, and would have probably protected us a whole lot better. But we ended up with the worst one, whom, truth be told, should have retired 20 years ago. And honestly, it was like a terrible, terrible experience. But the thing is, my story is a very common story. Yeah, there are variables and things that change from one place to another, but this story is something that happens to a lot of women, and a lot of women have similar stories, and they are told, wow, what a beautiful birth story. How lucky are you? And they're left sort of feeling bitter, in a sense where they don't feel like it was that beautiful or magical. Like, they feel like something was wrong. But they're repeatedly being told, oh, healthy baby, healthy mommy. And so they're like, yeah, healthy baby, healthy mommy. Thank you so much to this amazing doctor who delivered my baby. But in the back of their minds and their hearts, they feel like, what's wrong with me? Am I ungrateful? Am I not meant to be a mother because I don't feel like the birth of my child was the most magical moment of my life? Right? And the thing is, no, sometimes you're told that your birth story is perfect and magical in some way, but it didn't feel that way for you. And if it didn't feel that way for you, then that's okay. That's something that you have to process and that you have to heal from. And I always find it very disturbing when I would read medical files and the doctor or the nurse would respond to the question, how did the birth go? Oh, uneventful, blah, 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 birth, good ending, blah, blah, blah. And in my head, I always thought, who the hell is he or she or me to determine how this birth was? The only person who can tell me if that birth went well or not is the mom who gave birth. And so I always went back to the mother, giving her a little bit of time and said, how do you feel? Like, how was this birth experience for you? I know it's very fresh and very new, and you'll have more thoughts, that will develop over time as you work through your story, but how do you feel right now? Only she is able to tell anybody how the birth went. We might feel as though the birth went great because baby's alive and mom's alive, and there's that. Well, there's more to birth than just coming out of it alive. There's a lot more to birth than just surviving it. Birth is not an injury. It's not a disease. It's not a sentence. It's not an accident. It's not meant to be traumatizing or violent or aggressive. It's a beautiful, natural process. And is it challenging? Absolutely. Do you need support? Absolutely. But was it meant to be something that we fear beyond anything else, that leaves a bad taste in our mouth and leaves women with an astonishing number of postpartum depression, anxiety, and baby blues? No. Why would we have been created in a natural way, as smartly created as we have been, to be able to create life, to birth life, and to feed that child, and somehow the birthing process in itself be a huge risk for postpartum depression and anxiety? Doesn't make any sense. So we have to sort of think then that there is something in the way that we birth our children, and in the way that we treat women in pregnancy, in birth, and in postpartum care, that may be contributing to the high levels of postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. And yes, a lot of healthcare professionals are terrified of talking about mental health after birth. Because what if you ask a woman, how was it for you? How was your birth experience? And you were the attending physician. And she says, well, to be quite honest, I really didn't like when you said or when you did, or then you would have to pause, get off your high horse, acknowledge that perhaps there is room for improvement in your practice, say sorry, and then make it better. That would be way too hard, right? Oh, the progress we could make if we all decided to act like humans and actually ask women how their experiences were. Like, if we actually asked women to be brutally honest and to tell us what they like, what they didn't like, if we actually looked at our data brutally honestly, how many C-sections we're doing, how many epidurals, how many Pitocin, how many inductions, how many complication levels, etc. we are doing, and we actually unbiasedly evaluated them and then criticized our own practice to try and make it better, the improvements we would see would be enormous. And the lives that we would save would be enormous. And the postpartum depressions and anxiety, and yes, even divorce that we see would go down dramatically. So one day I will write out my entire, birth story when it comes to this little guy. But all in all, I have to say I have never been a fan of births in hospitals unless absolutely necessary. As a nurse myself and as a birth advocate, and this experience has simply told me that I was, yes, once again, right to avoid birthing in a hospital as much as humanly possible. Um, and I've always said medicine is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful miracle of a gift that we have. I mean, I'm a nurse. Obviously, I care deeply about medicine. However, it's also the most dangerous thing humans have ever invented when it's used inappropriately or in place of nature. When it's put above and beyond someone's own bodily autonomy, respect, and their own abilities and their own natural physical, beings, then this beautiful miracle that is medicine becomes absolutely dangerous and terrifying. And that is not something that that is something that I realized when I was working in the intensive care unit, because a lot of healthcare professionals who work in the ICU, specifically nurses, will experience a lot of mental and heart wrenching moments in their practice where they feel like what they have been prescribed to do, life lengthening, treatments and interventions, are causing terrible, terrible pain to their patients. And they feel very, very conflicted in following the medicine, knowing deep down that that person will not survive. And in the meantime, that person is suffering very dearly, enough that sometimes they are begging us to please stop. But they no longer have rights over their own medical decisions, and we have to follow somebody else's decisions and recommendations. And so I remember being a young nurse in the ICU and thinking to myself, there's a limit. There's a limit to what medicine can and should do. And when it starts causing human suffering, we need to back off a little bit. And when it comes to birth, we've gone way too far, guys. Like way, way, way too far. I watched people for 3 hours. I kid you not. They weren't very experienced, obviously. But for 3 hours, open trays of God knows even what, with 85,000, pincer grabbers and tools and bowls and syringes and bags and all the things. Like, they spent literally the time that they were in my room just setting up trays of useless crap all over the room. Alien costumes. I've given birth twice with midwives. And midwives, costumes for birth are clothing and a pair of gloves as needed, and during COVID, a mask. That's about it. Right. And so for me to see, like, I've seen hospital births, but it had been a while. And to see these people take out like booties and a dress and a freaking hat and like was ridiculous, guys. Like, so much paper clothing. And I get that birth can be messy, but I mean, welcome to the healthcare system, dude. It gets messy. And they basically spent so much time setting up all this equipment that they never ended up using. Yes, it looks like they're getting ready to go to outer space. I'm like, I almost wanted to tell the nurses and doctors, just in case you were wondering, you're not allowed to go inside of me. So you're not going to need all of this. Like, you need to like stay outside of me. So you don't need like a whole freaking spacesuit and, an oxygen mask to go with it. They didn't get to use anything that they pulled out because I ended up giving birth alone under the bed sheets on a hospital bed, screaming to tell them that my baby was coming. But they were so preoccupied with setting up their stupid tables and putting on, their costumes, and ignoring me, that they didn't hear me repeatedly say, she's coming, she's coming, she's here, until I actually removed the blankets and they saw the baby, on the bed in itself. Um, and so all of their equipment and all of their clothing was utterly, useless, because they missed the entire birth because they were so obsessed with their toys. And I remember when I was seeing them starting to set up all of these things, I actually looked at the nurse and I was laughing, and she's like, "Why are you laughing?" I said, "Well, coming from midwifery births, you're not going to use any of this. And if you try and approach me with any of this, me and you are going to get, into a fight. Like, there's going to be a problem." So I just find it ridiculous, the amount of stuff you're going to throw in the garbage and waste, and the amount of time you're going to spend on this, knowing you're not going to use any of them. Like, all of these tools, midwives have, but they keep them carefully packaged close by in a drawer unless they need it. Like, they don't need 5 freaking tables laying around your vagina with 25 fucking tools, in case of something. The whole thing was ridiculous. Like, if you need a suture kit after birth, you can take out a suture kit. You don't have to preemptively open a suture kit. Let's just not assume that the vagina is going to rip. Unless you're a lover of episiotomies and you have a knife pre-opened on the table, ready to rip her one, and you're going to need to stitch her up, right? In which case, I can see why you might have a stitch kit open. And even after I had given birth, I have never ripped. And believe you me, ladies, if you don't have an epidural, if you rip, you will know that you have ripped. If you don't have an epidural, if your vagina rips, you will know. And so after birth, the doctor said, "Well, aren't you going to let me examine you to see if you've ripped?" And I looked at him, I said, I have not ripped. I can tell you that. The vagina is attached to me. It's intact. And so he got like super upset, and I was like, "Take a look for yourself." And he took a look, and this idiot just like grabbed my vagina and just like pulled it, on, like, use your eyes, you dumb. And he just pulled it, like he was trying to move bed sheets or something. And he was like, "Oh, it's not ripped." And I just stared at him like, I didn't have an epidural. This is my 4th child. If I rip, I will know. Like, believe me, if you have a penis and somebody drives a knife through it, you would know. Like, if it breaks, you would know. You would notice, right? But for some reason, men and people believe that we women are not, smart enough, if we haven't had an epidural, to know if our own vaginas have ripped. We're not smart enough to tell you how we feel, if we feel good or bad after birth, if we need an IV or we don't need one. We're not smart enough to decide in what position we want to give birth, even though our bodies are telling us in what position we should be in. We aren't smart enough to tell you when the baby's coming, instead of you sticking your fingers up our hoo-has to try and determine when that baby's coming. We aren't smart enough to push when we feel like freaking pushing, instead of you yelling at us based on what you're seeing on a machine of when we should be pushing. An experienced mother yelling to you, "I'm giving birth right now." And in your head, you're like, well, I haven't told her to push, so she can't possibly be birthing. And so you focus on your astronaut suit and you miss the entire birth? Like, really? This is what our medical system has come down to. And here's the thing, this is nothing. I had an unassisted, vaginal birth in a hospital. They didn't get to use any tools on me. They didn't get to cause much violence or trauma. But even this experience has been quite traumatic for me, and it's going to take me some time to process it. So now I can only imagine the first time mom who's going into that hospital, trusting that the healthcare professionals there are well trained and that they will take good care of them, and be completely undermined, abused, ignored, treated like they're just a container. That's what I felt like. I felt like I was a container, and I was there to deliver a baby. But me, myself, my body was completely unimportant. How I felt was completely unimportant. I was a Tupperware with a timer on it, and my contents had to be ripped out because what was important was the content inside of me, and that I myself was just, not important at all. And so for me, even having, an unmedicalized birth in a hospital was absolutely traumatizing, and has left me with a horrible taste in my mouth. So I can only imagine for moms who actually go through, unneeded interventions, inductions, and the use of scalpels and vacuums when they're unnecessary, and forceps and all these things. And there is a time and a place where all of these things are useful, but it very rarely, very, very rare are the occurrences where these tools are actually helpful. The vast majority of the time, their use is caused by interventions that didn't need to happen in the first place. Overzealous healthcare professionals who want to be in control of a natural process. I had a surprise induction with my first instead of giving birth with the midwife at the Maison Naissance, and it was very traumatic. That is, I'm sorry you went through this. I was that first time mom, and I ended up with a C-section followed by a CBAC because I was monitored so closely that they were ready to cut me back open the next time around. Unfortunately, that's true. And I ended up leaving, I think, 10 hours after this little bub was born. And usually they keep you 48 hours, but I gave birth at 3 a.m. I was completely unable to sleep for the rest of that night. Like, those hospital beds, guys, are so uncomfortable after birth. I mean, what the huh? And my dad was at home with the kids, and he was freaking the hell out. And I was appalled and disgusted with the room, with, unfortunately, pretty much everyone there, even though most of it was directed at the doctor who was there during the birth, but, it's sort of, spread out. The food was disgusting. I mean, I realize we are not in a hotel, but if you want a mom after birth to produce milk, okay, and to want to stick around, you need to do better than powdered potatoes and boiled beets. Like, ew. That was disgusting. Also, I'm vegan, and they gave me sausages. So that was weird. So we ended up leaving at 1 p.m. and I gave birth at 3:18 a.m. And unfortunately, that hospital food gave me a bad indigestion. And so that following night, from midnight until 5 a.m, I had bad diarrhea while vomiting into a bowl, while having afterbirth cramps for 5 hours in the middle of the night, like violently, where my husband had to stay beside me to make sure that I didn't fall unconscious off the toilet bowl because I was so sick, which has never happened to me before. So be careful with what you eat after having given birth. There are consequences, but I feel much better since yesterday and today. But we ended up leaving, as soon as we possibly could, so that I could sleep in a comfortable bed with as many pillows as I wanted with my husband, instead of him sleeping on that weird lumpy thing in the corner of the room and my baby being placed in some weird see-through cabinet thing, beside me, and the beeping of the machines and all the equipment and people coming to touch my uterus every 2 hours. And oh, yeah, by the way, they are so intense about their tools and their vital signs and checking your uterus. However, when you get up to go pee and blood pools on the floor while you get up, nobody cleans up the blood with you or helps you. You have to walk alone to the toilet right after giving birth, blood spilling over everywhere, and then clean up your own damn blood off the floor, because nobody came ever to, like, we left the next day and what I had not been able to clean up was still on the floor. Like, I was legitimately at like 4 a.m. alone in the dark in my room trying to clean up blood off of the floor as I tried to go to the bathroom. So yeah, priorities were not in the best of places, honestly. So we're very, very happy to be home, and to be able to rest in a place where there's no blood on the floor. And my husband is feeding me, which means I'm eating amazing food. And I feel so much. I think a big part of it is the fact that I'm eating good food now. And that's probably why I feel so much better. And this little guy is doing amazing. And well, he's asleep right now, so I can't show you all of his bits and pieces. But he was somewhere around 7 pounds. Now the thing is, oh, they were unable to agree on how much he weighed because two people weighed him at two different weights. And so we're unsure how much he actually ended up weighing. But it was somewhere around 7 pounds. And he was born at 38 weeks and 2 days. And he's just so cute and snuggly. He has a ridiculous amount of hair, right? So much hair. And all of our babies, if you've seen them before, they're born pretty much without any hair, or they have like just a little bit of very thin, light hair that usually falls off. And then they don't have hair until they're like 1. But this guy has the same hair that his dad had at birth. So he has long, dark, black hair. And if you've seen my husband, guys, he is the spitting image of my husband. So once again, I was pregnant for 9 months. I went into labor. I gave birth to this child, and he looks like my husband. And we only have one that really does look like me. The rest are basically copy images of him, which is great because my husband is like amazingly handsome and he was the cutest baby that ever lived, which means they're all able to manipulate me. But I would have liked to have, a little bit of me to look back at, something. But this guy is a total dad copycat. And yeah, there's really nothing of me in there yet. I'm hoping as he grows a little bit older, there's a little bit more of me in there. He's a bit of a black sheep, literally. Yes. He has a ton of hair. He has a ton of hair. And we're not used to having babies with hair. And so when we do a bath postpartum, we do it at home. And so we don't use soap for the first bath. We just, wash them with water. And so he's very clean, but there's still a little bit of that white cream that's still in his hair. And I'm like, I've never had this issue before. I've never had this issue before of hair being in the way, but he's very content. He's very happy. And he's starting to be more awake already than he was in the first 24 hours. You guys were just lucky that you caught him sleeping because he really has been pretty much awake all since this morning. He was having a little bit of a hard tummy time this morning. You know how hard it is. You're born and all of a sudden we're stuffing you with milk that changes, concentration in protein and fats and liquid every hour, as it goes from colostrum to becoming milk. And so your digestive tract doesn't really get a chance to adjust and learn to digest all this food. And you have your big first meconium poop that you have to pass, which is laborious and painful and uncomfortable. So it comes with a whole lot of gas. And you experience hunger for the first time. You get cold for the first time. You have to go through birth, which is fairly traumatic too. So those first few days can sometimes be a little bit rough for that baby. And also, when I gave birth in the hospital, after they saw that the baby was, born and in the bed, they grabbed him by the feet and held him upside down, which is something that we did in the 70s and that we know is no longer necessarily or are useful and looks ridiculous and stupid and is cruel. And then he basically laid him on his back on me while he was choking in secretion. So I got up and I flipped him and patted his back to get the fluid out. And he said, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Well, there's a better way to get fluid out of a baby than hanging them upside down. You can just, use gravity and rub their backs gently instead of stuffing tubes down their throat and let that liquid, pool out." Like, have you seen this? Like hospitals that still grab babies by the feet upside down and slap their asses to make them cry? None of my babies have ever cried at birth, and that's perfectly fine. And thankfully, he did not either because I grabbed him from him and took him back. And then like 2 seconds after birth, he was like, "Okay, I'm going to cut the cord." And I said, "You're going to back away." Like, I just gave birth. My placenta isn't even out yet. You're going to back away. And I will let you know when I'm ready to cut the cord. And when I was actually ready and I said, "Okay, let's cut the cord because now I want to get on all fours so that I can deliver my placenta," he looked at me all, rudely and said, "Oh, I have your permission now?" And then he looked at my husband and said, "Do I have your permission now?" And I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, you have my permission to cut my umbilical cord now." You. So yeah, my love of like no, no, they shouldn't be doing that. There is really no reason to take babies and hang them upside down and slap their asses after birth. I have the last time I've seen somebody do that was in a video of a birth in the 70s. And I mean, I know some doctors still do that. They need to retire. This is not something that is taught. And like, but the problem is our new doctors are being trained by those doctors. They come into the hospital system and they're being trained by those doctors. So that's going to cause more doctors who hang babies upside down after birth. Anyways, right? C'est très arriéré. I was very, very livid. One day, if you're interested, I might sit down and tell you, beginning to end, what this birth actually looked like. Yeah, guys, do your homework. Be careful who you choose as a provider, and be very, very careful when it comes to hospital birth. They're not all the same. In Montreal, for example, the La Salle Hospital, much, much, much more naturally oriented hospital. They work with midwives a lot. So if you must have a hospital birth, they are a great hospital to have a birth in. But there's a lot of variance between doctors, between hospitals. I mean, I got to the hospital and the nurse who was on staff told me, "Oh, I've seen like less than like 5 births since I've worked here." So I was sitting there and I was like, "Okay, yeah, this is going to be great, right? And this is going to be absolutely fantastic." So, and their bath, so that you can relax through labor is inside of a utility storage room. So that was weird. And I almost gave birth in said tub, but it was not deep enough. And I knew that. So I was trying to get out. On that, guys, have a beautiful, beautiful week. I have a few appointments with some of my clients at BeBaby. And then I have appointments with Snuggles with this little dude. So I am happy that I had a chance to come sit down with you and chat a little bit and say hello since I missed you guys last week. And I will be here next week again for our weekly live show. And perhaps then we can go over the birth story if that's something that you're interested in. Let me know in the comments if you want us to do that. And maybe we can open a Pandora box for a few shows to come about talking about birth and your personal experiences and the things that you would have liked or the things that you did like, and how we can all, as mothers together, speak up for better. Because this system only changes if we, the mothers, demand for better. Have a great day, guys.